Hello and welcome to another episode of The Inter Show. This episode following the match against Cagliari in midweek. Today we have a fellow Interista on the show, James. Theme tune. Hello James, how are you?
Not too bad. How are you, Andrew?
Good, thanks. Okay, so James, I've introduced you in the introduction there. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you come to support Inter?
Well, growing up in Ireland, we only had the basic channels. There was no satellite TV back then. And the only football really on TV was Italian football on a channel called RTE. And highlights were on every Monday night. So that was pretty much the only football I got. So for some reason then I seemed to like the black and blue of Inter. And then obviously we got Channel 4 then later on in the 90s. And then obviously with Ronaldo going there, he was pretty much my favourite player growing up. So yeah, I just stuck with him and that was how it started.
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar story to myself. I remember as a child, we didn't get the Sky Sports package into the house until very late on. So it was Channel 4 really that I grew up watching, and the Football Italia coverage on that. You're Irish, but you lived in Australia for a number of years. Football probably isn't the biggest sport in Australia, but I believe it's growing. Are Australians generally interested in Serie A? Who do they follow, and is there much of an Italian expat community there?
Football is actually growing quite big in Australia, but it's mainly Premiership. I mean, there's literally no coverage of Serie A on TV there. You can get a Rai subscription on Foxtel, their equivalent of Sky. I think it's something ridiculous, like $30 a month, and you only get one game a week. But I do believe it used to be different years ago, but with the huge influx of British people in the last 10, 15 years, it's just mainly Premiership coverage to get over there.
Right, yeah. Okay. I suppose you're doing what we used to do for the few years where there was no Italian football on television here. That you just have to find a stream and hope that the stream holds up.
Yeah, that's it. A lot of people. I met a few Juventus fans. Seems to be the most popular jersey I've seen over there, and a few people I talked to. Not many now. They would just be streaming online. Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously we've come from a very good win in midweek, 4-0 against Cagliari. Joe Cancelo in the 3rd minute, Mauro Icardi in the 49th, Marcelo Brozovic in the 60th, and Ivan Perisic in injury time. What stood out for you from the game?
Well, the thing that stood out the most was our formation. I thought it worked really, really well. I really like the 4-2-3-1. I think it allows a lot of pressing when we don't have the ball, and it really put pressure on the Cagliari defenders. I mean, they didn't really have anywhere to go. The ball just kept getting pushed back into the middle, and we were flooding the midfield. And as soon as we got the ball, just so many players were willing to run. João Cancelo was running out to the right. You had Perisic coming to the left that allowed Rafinha and Caramo to get through the middle, and there was just so many options for Gagliardini and Brozovic. And I mean, it could have been 5-6 at half time. It was really impressive. Yeah,
I thought that as well. Now, I mean, the substitutes that were used were Ranocchia, Valero, and Candreva. I'm not sure why Spalletti still insists on using Valero, but in my opinion, it's probably more of a sign of how threadbare Sonning have left the squad this year, with us not being in Europe. The more obvious alternative to Gagliardini when he was injured was Vecino, but I mean, he's still recovering from injury, and I imagine Spalletti doesn't want to take chances. It's worrying that Gagliardini's injured to the hamstring. I mean, that's not good news at all, because the midfield's been going really well. I mean, hopefully Vecino will be fit, and as I don't think I can struggle with Valero for another 90 minutes. What's your take on Valero's performance?
Yeah, he's not very good. He just seems very slow. I mean, he used to be good, but I just don't think he's at the pace of the game anymore. And I think with the fluid style they're playing and the quick players we have, I just think he slows it down and doesn't add any value to the team at all, unfortunately.
Yeah. Everyone is enthusiastic about Caramo. He was very good, although the Cagliari players and Spalletti didn't like the back heel that he did in the middle of the park. To me now, I think I would be encouraging that. I would think that that's something that brings unpredictability to our game. But at the same time, I can understand Spalletti doesn't want Karamo perhaps to develop a certain arrogance. It's so important, though, to maintain that unpredictability that Karamo brought in if we want to compete at the top. The player I really want to talk about, though, is Marcelo Brozovic, because I've given him a very hard time over the last couple of years. I know he'll probably let me down again, but this lad really has the talent to be one of the best midfielders in Italy. I'd even say in Europe, and he finally looks like he's using it. If he continues as he is, he's going to become a more and more potent member of our squad. What do you think of Brozovic at the moment?
I think he's playing fantastic. I mean, he was pretty much my man of the match anyway. I know we'll get into that a bit later on, but he's didn't really put a foot wrong. He's link-up play. He's very good on the ball. He's creating little spaces. He's involving everyone, really. Even at times he was kind of bringing Valero into the game, which is an achievement in itself. So I was very impressed with him, I have to say.
In terms of Borja Valero, I don't want to attack him too much because he was very good earlier in the season, and I still think he could have a role to play because there do come games where you just need to slow the pace down and keep the foot on the ball, and he can do that better than most people. I just don't know whether he's tired or he's lacking in confidence, but he really is contributing nothing at the moment, and he slows everything right down. So I don't know where you go from there. As I said, Brozovic is the standout player for me in recent weeks. I'm particularly enthusiastic about the fact that he was able to not let the suspension bother him, because mentally he's not been the most resilient player over the years. Hopefully that's changing. But he just got back to working as effectively as he has been. My man of the match was Brozovic, at the risk of sounding boring. He's controlling the game so effectively at the moment. Though a mention does have to go out, of course, to Karamo. Who was your man of the match? I think you said Brozovic there.
Yeah, I would agree. Brozovic was definitely the standout player and man of the match. I mean, Perisic, Icardi, Rafinha played well, but yeah, Karamo does deserve a lot of praise. I mean, he's such a young guy. He's only 19 years of age, and he missed a couple of sitters really early in the first half, but he didn't let it bother him. He stayed running into the box. He was creating, and that's what all you can really ask from a 19-year-old kid, is to have the right attitude. I mean, at one stage, he even rugby tackled the goalpost. He was that eager to score a goal. So very happy with him, to be honest.
Yeah, I was terrified when I saw the replay of him going into the goalpost. It really looked it really looked like it could have been a serious injury.
I think the goalkeeper's elbow landed on him as well. It did look quite curious or relieved that he bounced back, and his attitude was good. He was rubbing his ribs, but he didn't roll around on the ground for any long period of time. He just got straight back onto the field and got on with it, and tells you everything about him, really.
Yeah. Just looking at the newspapers, like Gazzetta dello Sport said, Inter Eurovisions, they're obviously making a play on words with the Eurovision Song Contest coming up in a few weeks. And the newspaper suggesting that Inter are seeing the European chance now. Il Corriere dello Sport said Inter Luna Park, essentially Inter Moon Park, but making reference to the Luna Park theme parks, which used to exist on every continent, making reference to the enjoyment of the Inter squad and their fans. Tutto Sport said Cancelo opens the door to the Champions League. Part of me wonders why I include Tutto Sport in the show, because there's never anything other than Juventus coverage in it. I don't know how it can really take itself seriously as a newspaper. The match against Cagliari just had literally a small square on the front page, and there was a huge picture of Allegri. I didn't even bother reading the story. But I mean, Gazzetta does have a bigger focus on the Milan clubs because it comes from Milan. Corriere focuses more on Roma and Lazio because it's based in Rome. But I mean, two of those spots, as I said in the previous show, it just strikes me as a Juventus fanzine more than anything else. Metro Milano said Inter lives, mission completed. And I like looking at the newspaper of the opposition as well, just to see what they say. And L'Unione Sarda said darkness for Cagliari at the San Siro. Inter Cagliari finishes 4-0. James, would you have any opinions on those newspaper headlines there?
Yeah, well, obviously the two sports are going to expect a bias for Juventus and not much coverage to anyone else. But no, not much else to add other than if other people agree or disagree, that should get in contact with us at the Inter Show on Twitter, or the hashtag Ask the Inter Show, or at the Inter Show 69 on Facebook. Maybe they might have some opinions to add to it.
You can even email the intershow69@gmail.com. The next match is against Chievo, who are fighting for their lives. They're in real danger of getting sucked into that relegation zone. And I never like playing against teams fighting relegation at this stage of the season. Perhaps strangely, I prefer playing teams who are going for European places for the league, or for the league, as teams trying to fight against the drop are always tricky. What's your reading of the situation?
Yeah, I'm the same. I really don't like playing against teams in the relegation zone. I mean, we also have Sassuolo and Udinese as well, which not as much in relegation, but still they could be sucked into it. So I don't really like playing those teams at this stage of the season. They're fighting for their survival.
Yeah, I mean, they're always going to give 100%. I think the thing with Cagliari was Cagliari had, I think Cagliari have a few more points gap between themselves and the relegation places, and they could more or less secure the safety by beating, I think it's Bologna at the weekend, whereas Chievo need every point going, so they're going to fight from the very first minute onwards. I mean, Gagliardini's hamstring tear is the biggest news, because him, Brozovic and Rafinha seem to have been gelling in midfield. We need Vecino back, as we're going to be without Roberto for a while, and Borja Valero just isn't cutting it at the moment. In terms of formation tactics, I'd go with what we used against Cagliari. Caramo adds something to the team. Unpredictability, which has been lacking so much recently. I mean, how would you approach the match?
Yeah, I don't think Valero is the best option, and I don't really want to risk Vecino for this game, and I'd rather have him coming back for the Juve game. So just wonder maybe if we moved Skriniar into midfield and brought Ranocchia back, or would Ranocchia be too much of a liability?
I mean, I think Ranocchia has performed really well this season. I don't think he's let us down once, which is a strange thing to say. But perhaps Spalletti's been able to build confidence into him, albeit he's not played very often. And I know that Skriniar plays defensive midfield for Slovakia and plays that position really well for them. In terms of the race for the Champions League spots, we just got to keep taking our chances and getting the maximum return of points possible. I was disappointed that Lazio managed to get the win against Fiorentina, because I was really expecting Fiorentina to take something off them. But I'm enthusiastic about the run-in that they have. You know, they have Sampdoria next, who they're not in great form at the minute, perhaps, but when they are in form and they could turn it on as easy as anything in that match, they're capable of beating anyone. Then Torino away and Atalanta at home, which are never easy games. What do you think of the race for the Champions League, James?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all got tough enough run-ins. I mean, I actually think Romans is probably the toughest. I mean, they got Spal, Chievo and Cagliari, and that's 15th, 16th and 17th in the league. And they've also got Juventus. Plus, they're going to be distracted by the Champions League semi-finals and possibly a final. Like Lazio are playing a couple of teams that are going for European spots, so I don't know how hard they'll be, but you'd have to think they're better opposition. They're higher up the league. And obviously then, like the last day of the season, it's Lazio Inter, so it could come down to that. But I'm kind of optimistic. I think we might just pip Roma
Yeah.
to that last spot with Lazio finishing above us. That's the way I see it at the moment.
An interesting thing that I've heard mentioned in terms of the Lazio match is that De Vrij looks like he's joining Inter next season. And he could be faced in a situation where he's essentially playing against his future team to keep his current team in the Champions League and knock out his future employers. How do you think he'd handle that? Or do you think Inzaghi would play without him?
I don't know, to be honest. I'd like to think that he would give his all for the club. I mean, if he's coming here, we'd like to think he'd give his all for the club, but it is Italy at the end of the day, and conspiracy theories are going to run rife, so maybe Inzaghi might leave him out. It's an interesting dynamic that we could be facing, so we want to watch.
We're going to do a special segment now, a special part of the show, where we look at something from Inter's history each week. This was James's suggestion. I think it's a really good suggestion. The one thing that I picked out from the last week that happened in Inter history, certainly the most significant, was that on the 13th of April 1947, Giuseppe Meazza scored his last ever goal for Inter in a 5-2 win over Triestina. It was his second stint for Inter, during which time he was much less prolific, scoring only 2 goals in 17 games. But it was the final season in his unbelievable career in which he would posthumously earn the right for our stadium to be officially entitled Lo Stadio Giuseppe Meazza. The Primavera squad weren't great on Tuesday afternoon away to Torino. It ended in a 2-1 defeat with Facundo Colidio scoring a goal against the run of play. However, I still believe we'll make the playoffs at the end of the season, and it's worth remembering that we've already won the prestigious Viareggio tournament, so the youth sector is continuing to perform extremely well. As you're Irish, James, and as we both live in Ireland, I've taken an interest in young Ryan Nolan from Limerick. He plays centre-back in the Primavera team and looks decent. What impresses me most about him is his ability in the air. He's really dominant in the air. Obviously, Robbie Keane played briefly for Inter, but how would you, James, feel about a fellow Irishman playing for Inter if Nolan could make the grade?
Yeah, obviously it would be fantastic. I mean, it's good to see any Irish players do well at a big club, especially when it doesn't really happen very often outside of England. I mean, most of them play at championship level in England, so to have any Irish player in the top league is very good. And then obviously an Irish guy at the club you support would be absolutely fantastic. I think we had Liam Brady in the 80s playing briefly for Inter. Was probably a little bit more successful than Robbie Keane. But if we had an international playing at Inter, I think it would even just get a lot more people interested in this country in Serie A, and there'd be more conversations and maybe more coverage of it in the newspapers, which I think would be good to see.
Yeah, no, I agree. I remember, as a Welshman, I remember that there was news, or there was reports in the newspaper a couple of years ago about Bale potentially coming from Tottenham to Inter, and that really sort of excited me, but obviously it didn't come to pass. For any Interisti out there, it's worth knowing that Sport Italia covers a lot of our Primavera matches and doesn't seem to have a geo-block. So for anyone interested, it might be worth keeping an eye open for that. In other news, Empoli maintained their 11-point lead at the top of Serie B with a 3-2 win away to Cesena. There's also a bit of a fairy story happening in Greece at the moment. AEK Athens, one of the biggest clubs historically in Greece, 5 years ago essentially went out of business as a professional club and restarted as an amateur team from the bottom of the league system. 5 years on, they could clinch the Greek Super League title with a win against Levadiakos at home this Sunday evening. Adding to that, they could make it a double as they got to the final of the Greek Cup on Wednesday night, scoring a stunning last-minute goal against Larissa, meaning they went through on away goals. As bad as we've been over the last few years, James, a story like that surely has to give us a bit of confidence going forward.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, if they can essentially rise from the ashes of nothing and win, then surely we can come from just outside Champions League spots to be great again. it's always good to see stories like this in football. I know closer to home there was something similar with Wimbledon and AFC Wimbledon, and it's always good for the fans bit to see things like this happen, and it gives you faith in football, especially when there's so much money coming into it from the Arab countries, and kind of fans seem to get forgot about it. So that's another aspect of it I think I like of the story.
Yeah. Just before we sign off, I'll be giving you some details of our social media handles. If you just bear with me for 1 second with that. So the Twitter handle is at the Inter Show, and you can use the hashtag Ask the Inter Show. Our Gmail address is theintershow69@gmail.com, and our Facebook handle is at theintershow69. Just want to say a big thank you to James for his contribution today. Did you enjoy the experience?
Yeah, I did. Thanks very much for having me, Andrew. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was a little bit nervous and shaky at the start, but I think I handled it okay, and hopefully long may it continue, and I can help you build and grow this podcast into what you want it to be, if you'll have me.
You'd be more than welcome, and so would anybody else who would like to get on board as a co-host, as a guest, or even just sending in your questions. So thanks very much to James. Thanks very much for listening, and Forza Inter.
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.